although I have been and I am this and that, I hope we could continue on a more collegial basis, because this is postdoc circle, and although I have no artistic formation, I basically have an identity of a senior artist researcher, so I also consider myself as a postdoc researcher. And I'm very much involved with this question: who is postdoc artist researcher, and what he or she or they do? And that's what I'm going to end up to in this little comment, which is not a talk, really, not a presentation. It's just a bunch of remarks. Thank you for this invitation, and great to meet you, Anke, as well. And yeah, my focus will be quite much now in performing arts, and this research has to be made because these problematics I know it may look very different from as seen from different arts field. And before I really start to think about this question, I would just like to present some sort of institutional framing of artistic research, the way I see it. One traditional way to consider a discipline is to divide it into basic research, but the field of research is to divide it between basic research and applied research. It's not fitting at all to artistic research. A much more adequate way would to see it as extended between and suspended between transdisciplinary research and interdisciplinary research, in which case the status and the nature and character of research is understood according to its relation to reality, which is very different in transdisciplinary approaches than in interdisciplinary approaches. And by transdisciplinary approach, I think I understand artistic research that has pedagogical, technical, social, or political or medical purposes, so extra artistic purposes, and which may apply the methodologies and epistemologies of neighboring other more scientific disciplines, and work in harmony with them, not necessarily questioning them. Whereas in interdisciplinary contexts, we are challenging those other disciplines. The approaches are more avant-gardist, experimental, or speculative. We should simply keep in mind a very simple fact that I actually hadn't thought about before this day, that reality is something interdisciplinary. No discipline has a priority on reality, but our understanding of reality is born as a sum of very different kind of epistemological approaches, some of them being scientific, some of them more practical. So, okay, artistic research here in between these two, and very often having aspects of both of these ends. Okay, so then about this question of impact, I would leave aside now the political connotations or meanings of that term, and instead ask rather the effect of artistic research, because I think that what we should do is that we reclaim that word impact and redefine it the way that is more appropriate for ourselves, because nevertheless it's not completely meaningless of speaking of the effect of artistic research, and in this respect we might speak of its impact positively. Artistic research aims at making an effect. Namely, it aims at changing something. That's how I have understood it aims at changing something in the institutional order of things. As that happens in artistic research, the artist researcher basically transforms his or her their artistic medium into medium of research and a medium of transformation. So in this respect, artistic research is teleological. It is searching for some sort of impact, namely cause certain kind of change. And secondly, the result of artistic PhDs, if we during a little while speak about artistic PhDs, because it leads to this postdoctoral phase where we are now, the result is twofold. Namely, it produces a certain thesis, dissertation, a certain research outcome, and a researcher, new kind of researcher, artist researcher. And if you think about the impact of artistic research projects, of course, they do not change anything, even when they are achieved, unless there is this second thing or agent, this artist researcher who then keeps on repeating and disseminating and pursuing his or her project. So the project is not over when it has been accomplished as a PhD thesis. The work only starts then actually. Then from it just proposes certain kind of change, but after that the change really should be made. And then it's another story, it's another life. And then the rest depends quite much of the stubbornness of the artist researcher to keep on going, and his or her or their faithfulness to her to that task and their commitment. So artistic research, in other words, PhD studies, have a strong impact on us as artists. That's most obvious. The most immediate impact, it changes us as artists, but if that research project then has a more larger implications in wherever within the institutions or outside them in social reality or any sort of reality, it depends on the activity and agency of the artist researcher themselves. Okay. Next time we're going to speak a little bit about this transdisciplinary impact and then interdisciplinary impact, and there is almost all I say today. Well, as an example of transdisciplinary project, I would pick up this Arts Equal project that has been accomplished now, but here at the University of Arts Helsinki, but that took very many years, and quite a few of our doctoral artist doctorates, doctors that were educated at Tutke also participated in it during their study years already, but also and significantly during their postdoctoral period. And basically, transdisciplinary artistic research aims at implementing a new kind of practice or developing the existing practices. And they are very performative, so that they like realize what they name, and try to introduce some new way of working, for instance, and try to prove that look, it works. But of course, it always remains the question what working means. And here is a little, they have certain, that entails some sort of problem of self-legitimation, that it's very hard to prove that something that you have like introduced, no matter where, really works. of course, some external researcher can then make a kind of impact research, and sometimes that kind of research is done. But another way, practically proving the relevance of that innovation or invention means simply that people like it, people start to use it, and people uphold that practice. But anyway, in transdisciplinary context, the criteria of impact are very often non-artistic. That this is healthy, or it is more ethical, or more pedagogical, or whatever. And of course, artists are all the time very welcome in different kind of research groups and projects, collective research groups involved with transdisciplinary goals. There is one interesting aspect, and I noticed it. It was quite concretely as I was sitting in my office, because next to my office was another office where those arts equal researchers sat and spent their days, so that when those artist researchers got involved in transdisciplinary project, they basically disappeared as artists. They were just in their office, so that their activity had more impact. It became really like, now they were really changing the world, but at the same time, something of their artisthood was most obviously lost. So there's some sort of paradox there. But that's what an artist researcher can be, that he or she or they can really then get immersed in society in different kind of contexts, and then change them from within. And their work is substantial, maybe more substantial. Its consequences may be more durable, but at the same time, it's less visible. And in that respect, much less popular in the same sense as artistic outcomes normally are. Well, then, by contrast, interdisciplinary impact, if we speak about it, I would include in that interdisciplinary impact also artistic research that is done basically for only art's sake, if we might call it, like a kind of avant-gardist project where interest is basically artistic. But when something new is really done within the arts field in a completely new way, or whatever that novelty means in terms of art, it always has an impact on our understanding of reality. Otherwise, it wouldn't be artistic. So, but of course that it changes our relation radically in some respects radically to reality, although this is not necessarily highlighted, but in artistic research it should be. So in an interdisciplinary sense, artistic research is some sort of reality research. As I said already, reality is something interdisciplinary epistemologically. And then we should ask, what is artists' take of this reality? What can an artist researcher say anything meaningful to a biologist, sociologist, psychologist, physician? I think they should be able to do that. Maybe not yet, maybe that's the challenge. But anyway, that is now my own interest, methodologically, epistemologically. We should start to think about more seriously what are the artistic aspects of reality, and so that we could identify that would revolutionize our relation to reality and open a completely new way of conceiving our coexistence with beings like us or unlike us. But so that that could happen, we should first of all be able to make distinction between artistic and aesthetic, so that we could understand the specificity of artistic experience and the disciplinarity, the specificity of artistic research in relation to art research and aesthetics in a traditional sense. Or alternatively, we should understand the aesthetics in a novel way. But there is a difference, and that should be clarified, established. So what is artistic in our experience? In which way, to which extent we are all artists? And I have started to sustain the idea that artistic research could start to be understood as a study of artistic phenomena beyond artworks. And those artistic phenomena would be those artistic ingredients of reality. It's a hypothetical entity or hypothetical research object. But I think that it is one of the deepest reasons why artistic research has been born in this historical era that we are now living through. And there are many good reasons. It might be too much to say that people have always and everywhere made art, but it's much more relevant to say that people have always and everywhere dealt with artistic phenomena. It might be too much to say that everybody is an artist, but it might be more relevant to say that every one of us is capable of encountering artistic phenomena, and maybe also produce them at some occasions. So this question of experience of artist could be taken more radically. And also in relation to artistic research methodologies, my suggestion is that we should learn to study art artistically. So quite simply, so that there's a doubt that a doubt rises in me that we are tempted to consider artistic phenomena still much too aesthetically, that we use the terminologies of aesthetics instead of really creating an artistic way of considering artistic processes, practices, our ways of methods, modes of production. So the deepest impact of artistic research would be to understand what is the impact of art on us. It's very simply said, but I think we don't know it yet as a humankind. How art changes us as both makers and spectators, and why. Certainly not only for the healthy reasons. So if we understood this impact of art on us, then it would have a tremendous impact on our understanding of reality. It would open a completely new dimension to this miserable existence that we share. And so the deepest impact of artistic research would be to explain what is the impact of art on us. Why art? If we had a better understanding of this, then we could, in a more institutional disciplinary context, understand better what an artist researcher does in different kind of interdisciplinary research groups, for instance, and together with researchers from in other disciplines, so that we could clearly identify that this researcher studies what is artistic here, no matter what it is, this piece of reality that is under common interdisciplinary scrutiny. Okay, all this leads to the question of who is postdoc artist researchers and what they do, but maybe we can come back to it in the discussion. So maybe I don't say more about this yet. Okay, thanks.